everyone. When spirituality is a traumatic response, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. This sentence sums up what I deeply believe in. I believe that life is sacred and it's not just physical things. I believe the world should be spiritual, and yet in this video slash podcast, I will issue some warnings. I'm Zainab, a coach and a therapist, mainly childhood and ancestral trauma. And I'm also a trauma-informed breathwork facilitator. And today I will share my perspective on spirituality and how it can sometimes be a traumatic response or even used to bypass trauma and suffering. A little disclaimer before I begin is that I do not question spirituality or any spiritual practices because I personally am an energetic healer. I'm a healer. So I don't question all that. I just want to draw attention to certain extremes and the way in which spirituality is used, especially when complex trauma is involved. First, I'll explain how spirituality can be helpful in what you're going through when it's used appropriately. And indeed, spirituality can play a profound role in trauma by offering resources and strategies for healing, understanding, and integrating traumatic experiences. For me, spirituality is our inner voice, the voice of the divine within us. So, spirituality first helps restores hope and meaning because trauma often leaves individuals with a sense of loss. They feel that they've lost meaning, that they're hopeless, especially after events that shattered their perception of the world or their sense of safety, inner safety. And spirituality can provide a framework for understanding what cannot be understood and restore some meaning in the suffering. For example, I'll give you my own example. The belief the belief I had in a higher force, a divine plan, or a spiritual purpose, helped me when I lost my father, who was the only family member I had, who passed away on my 30th birthday in the middle of my postpartum. I just gave birth and I just lost the last member of my family. It helped me see my experience in a larger perspective, understand that my pain is a path of transformation or deeper learning, and that there are things beyond my human control. So it definitely helped me a lot. Spirituality can give as well a sense of security and connection because after trauma, many people feel deeply isolated or detached from their environment or loved ones. And spirituality, whether through prayer, meditation, or belonging to a group, can offer a sense of connection to something that is larger than themselves. And this connection can be felt in various ways, whether it's through divine connection, a spiritual community, or even with nature. And this connection helps restore emotional and physiological and psychological safety, which is essential for healing. Then 3, emotional regulation and calm, because spiritual practices such as meditation, prayer, yoga, or contemplation can directly impact the regulation of your nervous system, particularly the parasympathetic one, which is responsible for calming and relaxation, rest and digest, ventral vagal. And these practices help reduce the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, which is often exacerbated after trauma. Then it helps Spirituality can help with strengthening resilience because it enhances psychological resilience, which is a key factor in the ability to recover from trauma. Many spiritual traditions offer teachings on compassion, forgiveness, acceptance, and emotional balance. And these principles provide individuals with tools to navigate pain and suffering, helping them recover and grow rather than be overwhelmed. For example, some traditions focus on non-attachment or accepting suffering, which helps reduce emotional resistance to trauma and facilitate healing somehow. Then spirituality helps with personal evolution and transformation. An important aspect of spirituality is that it's its ability to transform a traumatic experience into a catalyst for personal growth. It often leads to spiritual depth or a new perspective on life and on oneself. And spirituality often provides paths for reconciling with pain itself and detaching from the suffering that pain can bring. I think I've given you an overview of the benefits of spirituality. And again, I'm not questioning spirituality. I'm just questioning its use sometimes when people are vulnerable. Yeah. So now I'll show you the opposite, so you can see how something that is really positive, in my opinion, can sometimes be negative or even dangerous when there is complex trauma, vulnerability, and unconsciousness while doing some practices. So although spirituality can be a powerful resource, it can also present risks if not approached in a balanced and conscious manner. When spirituality is used inappropriately or in a vulnerable context, it can hinder healing rather than promote it, and it can become a true traumatic response. The first one being the denial of reality or escapism, because in some cases, spirituality can become a form of escape or avoidance of the pain and suffering related to trauma. For example, someone might focus on spiritual ideals like non-suffering, non-detachment, or whatever, and thus minimize it, preventing it from addressing the trauma in a healthy and appropriate way. How many times have I heard, your soul chooses to experience this? Your soul chooses your partner because you're whatever, twin flame, or I don't know why, what, and you must evolve by their side. You choose their parents to accept their abuse. Of course, no, come on, guys. Someone who adopts the law of karma or believes like everything happens for a reason, it's a divine law. Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm not saying no, but don't focus on this, because it's minimize or rationalize your trauma instead of confronting it. It doesn't mean there isn't possibly reason for what happens. It's just that it's not the most important thing for healing a trauma. Okay? It can come after or not. Okay? Maybe you will understand later. Like what happens with my father. It took me a year. I healed my trauma. I grieved, and then I understood. And then I saw things with another perspective. But just don't focus on the higher perspective only. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Secondly, spirituality can pressure you to conform to some unrealistic spiritual ideals. Certain spiritual traditions, practices, or individuals who misunderstood the spirituality I embraced. I want a spirituality that is grounded. They may impose some rigid ideas about how one should feel or react to suffering. For example, beliefs like you must always stay positive or suffering is an illusion can pressure some individuals to repress natural emotions such as sadness, anger, fear. Example, a person in grief or who has experienced some trauma may feel guilty for not being spiritual enough if they continue to feel negative emotions, because there is no such thing as negative emotions, which can intensify some feelings of hopelessness or guilt. And when you're only love and light, you can't let yourself feel anger towards the parent that mistreated you, towards your abuser. So you repress it. And then one day it turns against you through self sabotage and self gaslight, self destructive behaviors. 3, inappropriate spiritual practices that can re traumatize. Some spiritual practices may not be suitable for people suffering from trauma. For example, deep meditation or poorly guided energy rituals that can revive some traumatic memories or activate some unresolved emotion, leading to re traumatization instead of promoting healing. I've witnessed this through improper Kundalini practices or breathwork practices or ayahuasca and so on. I'm not criticizing the practice itself, but rather the people who engage in it without having a real trauma awareness. Example, certain form of intense meditation or energy regulation practices may cause a person to confront physical or emotional sensations they are not ready to process, leading the feelings of derealization, anxiety, or loss of control at times. No practice is 100% safe when you deal with a human being, right? And it's really important to know how to handle when someone panics or can't differentiate between reality and non-reality and help them ground. It is really crucial and it's super important. Abuse of power or control by certain spiritual figures, that happens a lot in some contexts. Some groups or individuals or spiritual leaders can exploit the vulnerability of traumatized individuals by offering them quick fixes or imposing some beliefs that do not respect the individual's healing needs. This can lead to excessive dependency on spirituality or a leader, and sometimes even manipulation. Some individuals may become dependent on spiritual figures or groups to the point of abandoning their own judgment or foregoing appropriate medical and psychological assistance. And it disconnects them completely from their inner voice, and they're cut from their own spirituality, okay? All in the name of believing in a well known figure within the community. And this leads to a loss of personal power and an imbalance in the healing process. It's creating a vicious circle. Another thing is that spirituality, you can have, or some spiritual blame or guilt can exist in certain spiritual traditions or beliefs, can create some feelings of guilt or blame in those who have experienced trauma. For example, beliefs like you attract what happens to you, your trauma is a result of your soul's choice to evolve, can make people feel responsible for their own suffering rather than recognizing the violence or injustice that they have endured. For example, a victim of abuse may believe, or they will make her believe that their trauma is punishment for their past actions, and that can seriously impede healing and perpetuate guilt or shame. It's also possible for someone to feel guilty for suffering so much when they should be having faith, which continues to fuel the loop of the traumatic vortex. And please, guys, you can have faith, you can have a religion, you can believe in God and experience anger and do not believe anymore in life and have depression and have anxiety. So you can believe in God and still sometimes just question some things or just don't understand why you suffer or why some people are evil, okay? It's not whether one or the other, it can be both, okay? Spirituality without psychological support, that's another one. If spirituality is used as a substitute for professional psychological support, it can prevent a person from receiving inappropriate care to address the psychological and emotional aspects of trauma. For example, a person might believe that prayer alone, meditation, or energy healing can cure deeply rooted trauma without taking into account the therapeutic needs to address the emotional and psychological effects of trauma. Spirituality, energy work, and the subtle realms are important in healing, but therapy is fundamental. Spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing refers to this phenomenon where someone uses spiritual practices to avoid facing unresolved emotion, psychological issues, or trauma. In other words, it's when someone retreats, is into spirituality with the objective to escape the reality of their emotional or mental struggles instead of directly confronting them. So, spiritual bypassing can be problematic because it prevents a person from addressing deep wounds, healing, and then healing truly, and making them authentically connecting with their emotion and life experiences. While it's normal to use spirituality as a way to find comfort or clarity, it should not be used as a means of escapism. True healing comes from integrating the spiritual, emotional, and psychological aspects of our being rather than fleeing from or ignoring them. So, how can you use spirituality in a healthy way in the healing process? Well, spirituality, as I say, can be, I previously said, it can be a powerful tool in the healing process. It is important to approach it consciously and within balance. Here are some suggestions to avoid any spiritual bypassing based on my personal advice, my personal opinion, and my experience as a therapist since 10 years. So, combine spirituality and therapy. Spirituality should not be a substitute for solid therapeutic work. It's essential to combine spiritual practices with proven therapeutic approaches to address the effects of trauma in holistically. Okay? Avoid rigid ideals. So seek to practice a spirituality that is flexible, compassionate, and inclusive. Don't get trapped in beliefs or practices that minimize suffering or ignore the reality of trauma. Use appropriate spiritual practices like mindfulness, breathwork, trauma informed breathwork, compassion based meditation, healing prayers can be very beneficial in soothing the nervous system and reducing stress. It's important to choose practices that promote the reintegration of emotions, not their suppression. Stay grounded in emotional reality. It is crucial to acknowledge and accept the emotions related to trauma rather than ignore them. Spirituality can help find meaning and peace, but it shouldn't be used to avoid addressing difficult emotions. Avoid isolation. When spirituality becomes a substitute for human connection, it can lead to emotional isolation. And um, instead of facing our own emotion, we just think we're healed because we are isolated. So it's really vital to cultivate real human relationships for mutual support and shared healing. And finally, be aware of limiting beliefs. It is essential to question spiritual beliefs that may be limiting or promote guilt inducing ideas. So, choose spiritual teachings that support self compassion and the acceptance of emotions without any judgment. As a conclusion, spirituality can be a powerful tool in healing trauma, but it must be used with discernment and conscious. When it becomes a form of reality avoidance, emotional escapism, or imposes rigid beliefs, it can be counterproductive and hinder healing. It is important to find a balance, using spirituality as a complementary approach not as a substitute for therapeutic and psychological approaches. So include spirituality in your healing. Obviously, I deeply believe in it, but just seek as well help and therapy, and just don't use spirituality as the main trauma healing approach. So that's my opinion and that's my experience. I hope you like this. Please share or let me a comment and a like, so this podcast slash YouTube channel is known and my work is known by others. Thank you for listening to me, and let's see you in the next episode. Ciao ciao.